All right, we're back in another Sound the Battle Cry, and the name of the message today is Beware of False Anti-Jesuit Quotes, Dangers of Disinformation. And you might be wondering why we're doing a show about this. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. And the main focus is the topic of disinformation, spreading it, and in fact, you becoming one yourself unwittingly by spreading things that are not true. And that's the big danger that we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to be using some examples of quotes that are on the internet that are supposed to be, against the Jesuits, or from some books. And we're going to examine these quotes. And we're just going to show the overall pattern, though, of why it is so important to check your sources, to make absolutely sure that what you are sharing is true and can be proven before you share it. Because if you don't, you could discredit yourself. And now you have hurt your testimony. Because once you do that, people are going to be less likely to listen to you. Not only about this type of stuff, it doesn't have to be at the Jesuits, it could be about any other conspiracy thing, it could be about the Bible. It could be about any of these types of things. You discredit yourself. You hurt your trustworthiness. You say, I don't know if I could trust them because they shared this nonsense that was easily disproven. So, another thing I'm gonna tell you, and we're gonna show here, is that sometimes this just happens because people are lazy. Most of the time that happens when people share things. But some of this is put out there on purpose. And then those who are too lazy to check end up playing into a bigger agenda. So, that's a little bit of a setup of this. We're going to examine a few different quotes. We're going to start off actually with a little bit of a talk about disinformation. And then we're going to examine 3 different quotes and debunk them. But before I get into that, one quick word about the Jesuits. If you think that I'm for the Jesuits, you would be wrong. I actually have 4 videos exposing the Jesuits, starting from the history of the founder, Ignatius of Loyola, and his origins, and then we go through the spiritual exercises, how the order is structured, the black bulb, all that other type of stuff. I have that in a playlist on my channel called Rome. Okay, there's a bunch of different videos in there about the Roman Catholic Church. So I'm not pro-Jesuit. That's not the issue. The issue is, if we're going to do it, you better do it the right way. Because a lot of people have been doing it the wrong way. So, we're going to jump into that. So, before we get into that, you see some of these sites that pop up, and it just has a bunch of different quotes. And, look at this quote from John Adams, and Marquis de Lafayette, and Abraham Lincoln, and all this stuff, and Samuel Morrison. Look at all these quotes against the Jesuits, right? And that's what, made me do this, is you always see these types of things. And it's not just about the Jesuits. Some people have quotes, like websites like this, and like, Henry Kissinger said this, and this person, and that person, and it's a bunch of quotes. But if we don't see the source, there's no source. There's no source under any of these quotes. It doesn't say where you can find that they said these things. It just said, they said this. Well, that's a big problem. That is a big problem. You can't just, share something and say, this person said that, and we don't even know where they said it. We can't point to where you can find it, and we don't even know if it's true, if it's in context, if it's taken out of context. So that's a big issue here. But before we get into that, before we examine some of the anti-Jesuit quotes, we're going to talk a little bit about disinformation, okay? And to do that, we're going to jump into the conspiracy world of UFO type of stuff. Ufology. Right? Ufology, whatever you want to call it. Right? So there was this guy named Bill Moore. Okay? Apparently he's still alive. But he was well known in the UFO community for a while, back in the 70s and 80s. And he wrote a couple books. One of the books was the Roswell Incident. And it says that, just a couple points, he wrote a book called The Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility with Charles Berlitz in 1979 about an alleged naval military experiment popularly known as the Philadelphia Experiment aboard the USS Eldridge in 1943. That's pretty much a bunch of garbage. 1980, Moore wrote The Roswell Incident with writing partner Charles Berlitz, which alleged the Roswell UFO incident had involved the crash of an extraterrestrial spaceship. Okay? So wrote the Philadelphia Experiment and the Roswell Incident. Okay? Roswell is obviously one of the most well-known UFO incidences in history, right? Everybody's talked about that a million times. But this guy wrote a book about it in 1980. And then in 1987, Moore, along with ufologist Jamie Shandera and Stanton Friedman, circulated the Majestic 12 documents that purported the existence of high-level policymaking group, a policymaking group overseeing UFOs and extraterrestrials. Okay, now Majestic 12 is, in my opinion, disinformation. It's garbage. It was put out there to discredit people, and some pretty well-known people in the conspiracy world have spread that Majestic 12 stuff. And then we're going to talk about something else, a speech that he gave at a 1989 MUFON conference. Okay, so we're going to switch over to this book here, which is called, the book is called Conspiracy Films, A Tour of Dark Places in the American Conscious by Barna Donovan. Okay? So, I'm going to show you a part of this book from page 104, and I'm just going to read a little bit of this, and it's going to describe a little bit about Bill Moore and an incident that he had. And I'm showing you all this because I'm building you up to something that's a very important point that I want you to get down, okay? So, I'm just going to start from this paragraph. Moreover, the critics claim the Roswell incident is a quick and sloppy addition to Berlitz and Moore's cottage industry of speculation about the paranormal. The book looks more like a rush to fill a publishing quota, rather than a rigorous examination of what could amount to, if ever proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, the most amazing story in human history. In fact, a look at the previous work by the Roswell Incident scribes will turn up a list of specializing in strange hypothesizing. Berlitz himself is the more prolific of the two writers, having penned 4 other speculative works by himself, and then co-authored the Philadelphia Experiment, Project Invisibility with Moore in 1979. Starting in 1969, Moore had written 4 books about Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle. So you see what kind of stuff he's writing about. Very sensationalist type of stuff that there's no actual hard evidence for. Then, from 1981 until 1995, he wrote 6 more paranormal books ranging in topics from Atlantis to Noah's Ark, The Coming Doomsday at the Turn of the Millennium, a supposed Bermuda Triangle-like mystery spot in the Pacific Ocean, and a compendium of various unexplained phenomena. While Berlitz has been the busier writer, his co-author is more controversial. Moore had attained infamy in the UFO community through his involvement in an alleged disinformation campaign that might have led to the temporary mental unraveling of businessman and UFO investigator Paul Bennewitz. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about. This is a very interesting story about what happened with Bill Moore here and what he admitted to in regards to spreading disinformation. Okay, so a one-time PhD candidate in physics, Bennewitz had devoted a great deal of his energies and resources to convincing the world that aliens were actively manipulating people and interfering with governmental and military affairs. After studying the cattle mutilation phenomenon and witnessing the hypnotic regression sessions of UFO experiencer Myrna Hansen, Bennewitz had become convinced that an extensive network of alien bases was hidden throughout the world, and especially under the Southwest Desert in the vicinity of military installations like New Mexico's Kirtland Air Force Base and the Manzano Nuclear Weapons Storage Facility. The cattle mutilation, Benowitz came to believe, was but a part of the greater alien abduction plot, all an attempt by extraterrestrials to experiment on and extract genetic materials from humans. This secret enterprise, in turn, was but a part of an alien control and colonization plot. This plot was carried out either through a secret deal between the otherworldly creatures and the U.S. government, or by the aliens using mind control techniques to render the leaders of the world and heads of the armed forces incapable of resisting the alien infiltration. Okay? So that's not what I'm saying I believe. I'm saying this is what that guy was saying. I'm reading from the book that this guy Benowitz was saying he believed all that was going on with the aliens and the government, right? This sort of over-the-top hypothesizing had led the UFO group Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO for short, to conclude that Benowitz was paranoid and mentally unstable. Once Benowitz contacted Air Force Sergeant Richard C. Doty in 1980, detailing his invasion theories, Moore got involved in the strange Benowitz affair for the rest of the decade. As Moore explained in a highly controversial speech given to the 1989 convention of the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON. Okay, so pay attention here. This is what we are talking about. We want to focus in on this speech that Moore gave at the 1989 MUFON convention. Highly controversial speech he gave the MUFON 1989 MUFON convention. He had also been a government operative and part of a secret disinformation campaign designed to discredit UFO researchers. According to Moore's story, he and Doty were primarily responsible for feeding Benowitz the false stories. Feeding Benowitz false stories of alien invasions and mind control. Realizing that Benowitz was both mentally unsound and potentially influential in the UFO community, Moore and Doty were given the task of driving Benowitz over the edge and into a complete nervous breakdown. Benowitz was, in fact, hospitalized in a New Mexico mental health facility on 3 different occasions after suffering bouts of intense delusional paranoia. At the MUFON convention, Moore wrapped up his story by claiming that his involvement with the Benowitz disinformation project was something akin to being a double agent. Even while working for the military, Moore explained he was committed to exposing the truth about the alien origin of UFOs and the government's lies about the subject. Absolute garbage. The only way he could do this, however, was by appearing to aid in the disinformation, while at the same time using his insider status to dig for the hidden truth. As expected, Moore's speech caused a firestorm at the MUFON convention and throughout the entire UFO community. Okay, so we'll stop there from that book. Now we're going to jump to another document. So, let me just say this real quick. So, he gave this speech there. So, first of all, this guy, Bill Moore, he's obviously a very shady character. He admitted to working for the government, working with the military, and he agreed to feed, he admitted this, by the way, in his speech. He admitted that he agreed to spread disinformation in the UFO community and to feed this guy Benowitz disinformation and to drive him insane, which is a very immoral and messed up thing to do as well. So this guy's very shady, Bill Moore. Then he tries to tell people, I'm admitting that I spread all this disinformation, but I just agreed to do that, but I'm also finding the truth, and then I'm going to tell you the truth. Yeah, okay, buddy. Like anyone's going to ever listen to you again after you said, I've been intentionally spreading disinformation to you guys. I mean, it's just insane. All right, so a couple more things, and we'll finish up with this guy. So another thing that I found that gives a little more insight into this is a 1989 document from Skeptics UFO newsletter, December 1989, and it says Philip J. Klass at the top. Okay, Washington, D.C. Now, if we scroll down here, it's sort of like they give a bunch of, sort of like the latest news within the UFO community, I guess. But if you go down here, they reference this event at the 1989 MUFON conference. Okay, so on page 3, on page 3, they say this: highlight of the 1989 MUFON conference in Las Vegas was the Saturday night speech by William L. Moore, which surprised and shocked most of those in the audience. Moore's longtime collaborator, Stanton Friedman, appeared as shocked as others. Unlike other MUFON speakers, Moore did not submit his paper in advance for publication in the conference proceedings. Audience was told it could be purchased after his talk for $10. In Moore's talk, he claimed that he had earlier served as a government agent to infiltrate and report on the activities of APRO and other ufologists as a government disinformation agent to feed spurious information into the UFO movement. Moore admitted that the disinformation was responsible for the nervous breakdown of a ufologist in Albuquerque. Following Moore's 1.5-hour talk, he and Friedman, whose speech preceded Moore's, were scheduled to respond to questions from the audience. Instead, when Moore finished, he dashed off the stage and disappeared. He was not seen publicly at the conference the following day. One MUFON member, whom I encountered at the airport, summed up his reactions in these words: Moore took careful aim at his foot and missed and blew his head off. Wow. UFO Magazine's account of Moore's MUFON talk was headlined, UFO Researcher's Confessional, Disinformation Ploy Revealed. The article quoted Barry Greenwood, editor of Just Cause UFO newsletter, as saying, quote, in his Moore's speech, he criticizes others for spreading disinformation, but for the last 10 years, Bill himself had been one of the biggest sources of disinformation in all of ufology. Unreal. When interviewed by UFO Magazine, Moore rationalized his alleged role as a government mole and disinformation agent in these words, quote, if they hadn't found me, they would have found somebody else. Gross. That is the justification of a very immoral person. Well, if I didn't do it, someone else would. In Moore's Las Vegas speech, he endorsed Whitley Strieber. I wanted to mention this as well before we move on to the next point. Whitley Strieber. Many of you may know about his books, like Communion, about alien abduction experiences, right? In Moore's Las Vegas speech, he endorsed Whitley Strieber's UFO abduction claims, saying Whitley has come very close to the truth in a number of ways, gives every appearance of being a real situation. What Moore failed to tell the audience was that he had served as a paid consultant to Strieber for his new book, Majestic, whose theme involves Majestic 12 cover-up of crashed saucers and a childhood UFO abduction of one of those involved in MJ-12. The book is listed as fiction, but in Strieber's talk show appearances to promote the book, he implies it is based on fact. Okay? So, I wanted to make sure that we mention that as well, because talking about the shady character of Bill Moore, that he was a paid consultant to Whitley Strieber. So it just goes to show, this guy admitted to willingly spreading disinformation. And he was connected to promoting that book as well. Okay, so there's all the controversy around it. Now, I have one more thing about Bill Moore, and then we'll move on. First of all, for the proof that he said this, I actually found a video of that speech on YouTube. Okay? The 1989 MUFON speech. And I put the link right on the screen. Bill Moore, 1989 MUFON speech.avi. It's on YouTube. Okay? So the whole thing's on there. You can see him say all this stuff yourself. And the reason I'm saying that is the last thing I'm going to show you from him is a quote from his speech. And the reason I'm showing you this quote, and I told you all that, is because that gives you all the background behind this quote to give maximum understanding when we read this quote, to show you how important this concept is of disinformation, how it works, and how you could unwittingly be being used as a disinformation agent to spread it. Okay? So let's read the quote, and then we'll move on to the Jesuit stuff. Here is the quote from Bill Moore, from his speech. Disinformation is a strange and bizarre game. Those who play it are completely aware that an operation's success is dependent upon dropping information upon a target or mark in such a way that the person will accept it as truth and will repeat and even defend it to others as if it were true. Once this has been accomplished, the work of the counterintelligence specialist is complete. They can simply withdraw in the confidence that the dirty work of spreading their poisonous seeds will be done by others. Those of you who want proof of how well the process works need only look around you. Every time one of you repeats an unverified or unsubstantiated bit of information without qualifying it as such, you are contributing to that process. And every time you do it, somebody in a need-to-know position sits back and has a hoarse laugh at your expense. Laughing at you. Laughing at you. Spreading their disinformation. And so I'm giving you this strong warning right here, right at the beginning, just in general, before we get into some of these examples of the Jesuit quotes, okay? But this principle applies to everything. Everything that you say, everything you spread on social media, everything you repeat to someone, whether you write it or you say it, you need to watch out that it's not disinformation. Now, misinformation, that's just something that's you're misinformed. It's sort of by accident. It's not all of the truth. But disinformation is intentionally spread to discredit you. Okay? Now, one funny point I want to make before we get into these Jesuit quotes is that people in conspiracy world will often make fun of people that watch mainstream media. Oh, these people are so brainwashed and all they do is repeat the talking points of the mainstream media. Well, guess what? I have seen countless people in the conspiracy world, over the past 17 years, mindlessly quote people, repeat statements and things as if they're fact without ever checking to see if they're true. And they're doing the same exact thing as the people that they look down on and make fun of. You are repeaters as well. Just repeating things that you hear as if it's fact. Just because it goes against the so-called mainstream narrative, well, you don't check that either. Not good. Okay. So now that we've established that, let's get into the first example of debunking a anti-Jesuit quote. And this comes from we'll talk about this first quote. False anti-Jesuit quotes. This quote appears in various forms in different places. The most recent is probably in the book 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Chiniquy. The quote appears in the book this way, in chapter 59. All right, so here's the quote. See, sir, from this chamber I govern not only Paris, but to China, not only to China, but to all the world, without anyone knowing how I do it. It says Tambriorini, general of the Jesuits. Supposed to be a black pope that said that. Okay. Now, before I move on and examine this quote a little bit more, I want to say something about Charles Chiniquy. First of all, I believe that also that quote, the one that I just read, may appear in the book Vatican Assassins by Eric Phelps, and I'm going to talk about him in a second. We're going to deal with him in a second. But I believe that appears in that book as well. Okay, so let's just talk about Charles Chiniquy, because a lot of people like to quote him, and he was this great guy who was supposed to be a Catholic priest, and then he got out and he spoke against Rome and against the Jesuits and all this stuff, and he talked to Abraham Lincoln, and he warned him about his assassination plot by the Jesuits and all this stuff, right? And he said, oh, he's this great guy. Well, I'm going to tell you a couple things about him. I don't know if you knew. There's this book that was written. It's an anti-Jesuit book called Engineer Corps of Hell. And if we go to the title page of the book, it says Engineer Corps of Hell, Rome Sappers and Miners, containing the tactics of the militia of the Pope or the secret manual of the Jesuits and other matters intensely interesting, especially to the Freemason. Why is it talking about that? And lovers of civil and religious liberty, whithersoever dispersed throughout the globe. Okay? Then it says, oops, I keep doing that. Compiled and translated by Edwin A. Sherman, 32nd degree. It says, past Grand Registrar of the Grand Consistory of the 32nd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry of the state of California, and the Secretary of the Masonic Veteran Association of Pacific Coast, etc. Okay? So, first of all, this book was written by a Freemason. Edwin Sherman is a Freemason. Next point, he dedicated the book to Charles Chiniquy. It says, to Rev. Charles Chiniquy of St. Anne's, Kankakee County, State of Illinois, the Martin Luther of America, the client and friend of Abraham Lincoln, the martyr president of the United States, this work is most respectfully and affectionately dedicated by the compiler. Okay, so this Freemason dedicates the book to Charles Chiniquy. Well, guess what? By the way, this copy of this book, Engineer Corps of Hell, it says Vatican Assassins at the top. It's because it came with a book of a collection of documents called suppressed anti-Jesuit documents. So actually, Eric Phelps adds notes to these. And here's the note that he added on the next page. Charles Chiniquy and Edwin Sherman were friends and both were Freemasons. Okay? So, Eric Phelps here admits Charles Chiniquy was a Freemason. And then he says, however, both men were Bible believers and very anti-Jesuit in their writings. Let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there. If you are a Freemason, you are not a Bible believer. There is no such thing. And there never will be such a thing as a Freemason that is also a born-again Christian, a Bible believer. Absolutely not. The God of the Lodge is not the God of the Bible. Okay? And we're not going to go down a rabbit hole with that, but we're just saying that Charles Chiniquy is a Freemason. He says, both fearlessly exposed as sons of Loyola as the true assassins of Abraham Lincoln, and which indicates that an element of Freemasonry is not aware it's controlling high-level Shriners serve a Jesuit general. Yeah, whatever. Okay? Just, they're speculative garbage. Okay? No! And this is the thing that people have to understand. Am I for the Jesuits? No. But does that mean it's okay to be for the Freemasons? No. Absolutely not. I don't care that they exposed the Jesuits. What else are they trying to do here? I don't trust that. So that's just a point about Chiniquy. Now back to the quote here. Okay, so looking at this quote, if we look at this quote on Wikipedia, On a Wikipedia page about Jesuit conspiracy theories, the quote appears in this form. See, my lord, from this Rome I govern not only Paris, but China, not only China, but the whole world, without anyone knowing how it is managed. General of the Jesuits speaking to the Duke of Brancas. Okay? And you keep looking for the source, though, because, Chiniquy never offered a source. He just said, yeah, this guy said that. And then you say, well, what's the source of this? Well, the source on Wikipedia says it's supposed to be the following. Andrew Steinmetz. Now, from my research, that guy was anti-Jesuit, and I think he might have used to be a Jesuit, and he spoke against them. I don't know. I have to look at that. But he had a book called History of the Jesuits, Volume 1, page 107. Okay, that's what they list as the thing. And they say, quoting Michelangelo Tamburini, 14th Jesuit Superior General, 1706 to 1730. Okay, so here's the thing. I want you to remember this. They try to say this is quoting this Black Pope, the 14th Black Pope, Tamburini, which was Black Pope from 1706 to 1730. So remember that. Now, Steinmetz, where did he get the, because we got to keep going. You got to be brutal and relentless when you're trying to find out if this is true, when you're looking into the sources. So you go look at Andrew Steinmetz, and it's like, well, where did he get the quote from? Steinmetz then says that this is his source for the quote. And he lists all the stuff, vide, signor, and all the, I'm not going to read all that, it's in French. But you see right here it says Arnauld, and then Morale Pratique. That's the book that it's from. You can find this quote on page 51 of Morale Pratique on Google Books. I'll just actually jump there real quick. I'll show you. Okay, so if you go on Google Books, you can actually see this for free. La Morale Pratique des Jesuits by Antoine Arnauld. You can read the whole thing on there for free. And on the screen, I have it in French. And I can't speak French, but you can kind of see where it occurs right here. And I've translated it before with Google Translate. But you can kind of see here it says chamber. You see he's talking about from this chamber I govern not only Paris but also China. Not only China but also Le Monde, right? That means world. I know that much, okay? So we got that quote in here from that book, Morale Pratique. Now, back to this. So it's on page 51 of that book. This is referring to the book La Morale Pratique des Jesuits, or Moral Theology of the Jesuits by Antoine Arnauld, a French Catholic theologian. Here's the problem. Okay? Here's the problem to quote. The claim is two problems, actually. But first is, the claim is that the quote comes from Tamburini when he was the general of the Jesuits. He was general from 1706 to 1730. I said that earlier, right? Antoine Arnauld was alive from 1612 to 1694. So he wasn't even alive when Tamburini was the general of the Jesuits. How could Arnauld be quoting Tamburini in his book, Moral Theology of the Jesuits, which was published in 1643? Okay? So, Arnauld publishes his book, Moral Theology of the Jesuits, in 1643. He says he has a quote in there from Tamburini about how he governs the world, in China and Paris and all this stuff. But Tamburini wasn't the Black Pope until 1706. And the other problem is, the only documentation that we have that he said this is just taking Arnauld's word for it. Oh, he's the one that said, oh, well, yeah, I heard him say this. We don't actually have it in writing from this Black Pope. So that's a problem. Okay? So I want you to see how people just quote this, like Chiniquy just quoted this, but I've seen other people, they just post this quote, and they just say, oh, look it, a Black Pope said, from Tamburini said, they say the 14th Superior General of the Jesuits said, see, from this chamber I govern not only Paris but to China, and all this stuff. And they just post a quote, they share it around everywhere as if it's absolute fact, and it's not proven that, and the guy even said it. It's not proven. And by the way, each one that I do is going to get crazier. It's going to get worse and worse. And the last quote I'm going to show you that I'm going to debunk is the absolute worst. It's going to blow your mind how bad it is. Okay. So there's that one. Let's move on to the next one. So what we're going to move on to next is a quote from Eric Phelps' book, Vatican Assassins, chapter 37, and about Stalin. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Eric Phelps. I'm not going to go too much into it, but I do not recommend him. I do not trust him. I don't recommend him. I think he's not good. You know, I've been researching this type of stuff for a long time. Okay, a long time. And, in fact, I was around, some of the people that might come across this video might be shocked to know, if they've been into Jesuit research, that I was around all the way back in the Unhive Mind days. I know I was there reading everything on Craig Oxley's website. I saw the discussions between Craig Oxley, the emails with Craig Oxley and Leo Zagami and Eric Phelps and all these other people, and they're all the entire 15,000 page website. I was reading that. I was reading all the discussions. I knew about all these books and the points that they would make and the research that people were coming up with. I was there, and also the radio show, Greg Szymanski, that he did, and I wrote to Barry Shamish. He sent me a free DVD, the Vatican-led New World Order, or Vatican's whatever it is, War in Jerusalem or something, whatever it is, the video he did on that. You know, so there's I've been around for a while researching this stuff. And at the beginning, you know, I thought that Phelps had some good information, but then, you know, as time went on, I started to realize that, first of all, he had some of these quotes that didn't pan out to be trustworthy, so that was bad. But also, and I don't use this word lightly, because it's overused to the point today to mean nothing, but he is racist, okay? It's just a fact. And what I mean by that is literally says that white people are superior to blacks, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff about that. It's a big argument, it's a big discussion. I don't want to get into it, but it's a fact. At first I thought it was just he was talking about just separation, but there was equality, but it's beyond that. And I don't agree with that stuff. So and I also think it's to discredit you. Instantly, and whenever you reference his work, it's a trap. You're instantly discredited. If you tell someone that to recommend them to read this book, or you quote this book, you're instantly just going to be discredited when they look at this guy who's also an Israeli diamond merchant. But that's another point. Anyways, so that's just my big disclaimer about Phelps. I don't promote him. I can't recommend him. I don't promote him. And he does have a lot of good information in the book. It's too bad. It's too bad because it's mixed in with a bunch of other stuff. So we're going to look at one example here of the what he says about Stalin. And, you know, he says all this stuff, but he says, Stalin, secretary of the Communist Party, indeed it was common knowledge in Russia that Koba was a Roman Catholic. To the contrary, it was a well-kept secret that he, like Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler, had a concordat with the Pope. It was also known that he, like President Clinton, was educated by the Jesuits. Oh, really? Was it known? And what's your proof? That training transpired in Tiflis, Georgia, just outside of Russia, as the Tsar's ukaz of 1820, banning the order from Russia, was not enforced there. Of Stalin's Jesuit training we read. Okay, so this is what he quotes. Okay, and then we're going to check the source that Phelps used. He quotes this as proof of Stalin's Jesuit training. This is a big claim, right? It's a big claim. And when, you know, we know about someone as infamous as Stalin, and for this guy to say, yeah, and he was trained by the Jesuits, you better have a lot to back that up, that claim. But anyways, he says, then Here's the quote. Then, 1894, being nearly 15, he entered the Tiflis Theological Seminary on a free scholarship. Stalin then states, in protest against the humiliating regime and the Jesuitical methods that prevailed in the seminary, I was ready to become, and eventually did become, a believer in Marxism. The Jesuits are methodical and persevering in their work, but the basis of all their methods is spying, prying, peering into people's soul to subject them to petty torment. Okay? And that's all he gives. Now you might read that and go, wow, Stalin talked about Jesuitical methods, and he said the Jesuits are methodical and blah, blah, blah. And he says that he was educated by Jesuits. And where was that? Tiflis. Okay? That's what he says. He says he was educated by Jesuits, and here he is talking about it. So, boom, there we go. Looks good, doesn't it? Well, it does if you don't examine the facts, because there's two major problems with this. First of all, what's what's the note? Well, it says point number 23 in chapter 37. So we're going to scroll down and check that. Okay. I'm going to show you exactly how not only am I just going to jump around and show you, debunking these things, I'm also going to show you how you should approach this stuff, that you should go and look up. Okay, chapter 37. Number 23, let's see what the source is. It says, 3 Who Made a Revolution, Bertram Wolfe, page 96. Well, there's 3 problems actually with this. Okay, so can we see that source? Yes, we can. Here it is. The book is online for free at the Internet Archive. 3 Who Made a Revolution, Bertram Wolfe. And first mistake is, the quote's not on page 96. So now you already got a strike against you. It's on page 411. But I found the quote. And so let's read the full quote in context. And it says, then being nearly 15, he entered the Tiflis Theological Seminary on a free scholarship, providing uniform clothing, meals, and lodging. The studies were dull, dogmatic, repetitive. The discipline was that of a spiritual barracks, loyalty to God and the Tsar. The order is not certain, being the overriding consideration in determining the content of all subjects. These students were immured within the walls, except for a brief leave on Sunday afternoons, were spied upon and regimented from beginning to lights out. Stalin thus described his seminary life in his interview with Emil Ludwig. Okay, so here's a quote from the interview, and this is where he gets the quote. Ludwig, what drove you to become a rebel? Was it perhaps because your parents treated you badly? Stalin, no. My parents were uneducated people, but they did not treat me badly by any means. That sounds like a lie, because pretty sure his mother left his father and took him because he was an alcoholic and he beat them. But anyways, it was different in the theological seminary of which I was then a student. In protest against the humiliating regime and the Jesuitical method, so he says that, right, that prevailed in the seminary, I was ready to become, and eventually did become, a revolutionary, a believer in Marxism. Ludwig, but do you not grant the Jesuits any good qualities? Stalin, yes, they are methodical and persevering in their work, but the basis of all their methods is spying, prying, peering into people's souls to subject them to petty torment. What is there good in that? For instance, the spying in the dormitory at 9 o'clock, the bell rings for tea, we go to the dining hall, and when we return, we find that a search has been made and all our boxes have been turned inside out. What is there good in that? Okay, so, a couple things about this. First of all, he uses the word Jesuitical. Now, in case you didn't know, this word has been used to be more common back in the day. People used it a lot more often. And it used to be in the dictionary. It's either been taken out or the definition has been changed of the word Jesuitical. Because if you look it up, it means cunning, prevaricating, and all these other types of things, right? Being deceptive. And so he's just using it in that way. And then Ludwig says, but do you not grant the Jesuits any good qualities? So he's responding to Stalin using the word Jesuitical as if to say, just to talk about the Jesuits in a negative way. And he says, well, you don't think the Jesuits have any good qualities? Just to talk about that subject. There is nowhere in here, in this quote, that says that Stalin was trained by Jesuits. Because if we look at the university, it was called Tiflis, okay? Before, I think, 1936, it was called Tiflis. And then it changed to Tbilisi Theological Seminary. Well, guess what? It's a Russian Orthodox Church seminary. Okay? This has never been a Jesuit institution. It's a Russian Orthodox seminary. And he was simply saying that they were acting Jesuitical. And the guy asked, well, you think there's no good qualities about the Jesuits? He's just speaking in general terms because he used the word Jesuitical. And he didn't like how the instructors at the seminary were acting, which was for Orthodox, Russian Orthodox seminary. That's what it was for. And so when we summarize all this together, Eric Phelps puts his quote in there. He chops up the quote. He says it's on the wrong page number. He says a faulty conclusion, saying he's trained by the Jesuits. That's what the statement means. And he doesn't even check, or maybe he did, I don't know, that it was an Orthodox seminary. And you can't find evidence online that this was ever a Jesuit seminary. And some people like to speculate. Let's say let me just go as far as I can with you guys. Let's say that maybe you think there were secretly some Jesuits at the Orthodox seminary which were training Stalin. I would even grant to you that is a possibility, that may have happened. But you know what the problem with that is? We have zero evidence of that. None. And so when you just throw around that assertion as if everyone should just believe it because you said it, and you said, well, yeah, there was a Jesuit there. Well, what proof do you have? Well, I don't have any, except this jacked up, out of context quote. That doesn't even mean what he says it means. Well, you got nothing. You got nothing. And now that just blew up in your face, and you're discrediting yourself. Now, I've saved the worst for last. The worst for last. So let's go to this quote. So go back to this page it's got all these anti-Jesuit quotes. Lincoln said this, and Morse, and all these people, right? So among all these quotes, here's one by Napoleon, Dostoevsky. Oh, look at all these anti-Jesuit quotes, right? And then we come to this one, James Parton, American historian. And the quote they have listed for James Parton is this: if you trace up Masonry through all its orders till you come to the grand tip-top head mason of the world, you will discover that the dread individual and the chief of the Society of Jesus are one and the same person. Whoa! Wow, that sounds crazy, huh? This guy, who's just a random historian, I guess, this guy says if you trace up the Freemasons' ladder, you find the top of the Masons is also the Black Pope. Man, that's crazy that someone said that, huh? This historian. And before we go on to look at the quote, I want you to see how many different websites are quoting this guy, using that quote. Okay? They put the James Parton Anti-Jesuit Quote on their site. There's a website called BabylonBreaking.org, which has an article called Agents of Antichrist, the Jesuits by Richard Bennett. And they put that quote in there. Then the quote appears on the website Jesus-is-Lord.com. They have that quote on there. And another one is comingworldwar3.wordpress.com. That's when it has all the famous quotes about the Jesuit order. Okay, so it's on amazingdiscoveries.org. A bunch of different pretty well-known sites and groups are using this quote to prove that this guy was saying the Black Pope and that of Freemasons are the same thing. Well, all we have to do is go to the source of the quote. And the quote comes from James Parton's book, The Life of Horace Greeley, which you can read for free online. And we are reading from page 67 in a chapter called The Anti-Mason Excitement. And let's read it in its full context. It was about the year 1827 that the Masonic excitement arose. Military men tell us that the bravest regiments are subject to panic. Regiments that bear upon their banners the most honorable distinctions, whose colors are tattered with the bullets of 100 fights, will on a sudden falter in the charge and fly like a pack of cowards from a danger which a pack of cowards might face without ceasing to be thought cowards. Similar to these causeless and irresistible panics of war are those frenzies of fear and fury mingled which sometimes come over the mind of a nation and make it for a time incapable of reason and regardless of justice. Such seems to have been the nature of the anti-Masonic mania which raged in the northern states from the year 1827. Now, this is giving you a hint as to where James Parton is going with this. James Parton says that when this happened in the country, remember there was an anti-Masonic party actually at one time in the country, in America's history? Well, he says that when there was this anti-Masonic mania, it was a time when people were incapable of reason. They were acting crazy. He goes on to say, a man named Morgan, a printer, had published for gain a book in which the harmless secrets of the Order of Freemasons, of which he was a member, were divulged. Public curiosity caused the book to have an immense sale. Soon after its publication, Morgan announced another volume, which was to reveal unimagined horrors. But before the book appeared, Morgan disappeared, and neither ever came to light. Now arose the question, what became of Morgan? And it rent the nation for a time into two embittered and angry factions. Morgan, said the Freemasons, that perjured traitor, died and was buried in the natural and ordinary fashion. Morgan, said the anti-Mason, that martyred patriot, was dragged from his home by Masonic ruffians, taken in the dead of night to the shores of the Niagara River, murdered and thrown into the rapids. It is impossible for anyone to conceive the utter delirium into which the people in some parts of the country were thrown by the agitation of the subject. Okay? So remember, he's saying these people are in utter delirium. Books were written, papers were established, exhibitions were got up in which the Masonic ceremonies were caricatured and imitated. Families were divided. Fathers disinherited their sons, and sons forsook their fathers. Elections were influenced, not town and country elections merely, but state and national elections. There were Masonic candidates and anti-Mason Masonic candidates in every election in the northern states for at least 2 years after Morgan vanished. Hundreds of lodges bowed to the storm, sent in their charters to the central authority, and voluntarily ceased to exist. There are families now about the country in which Masonry is a forbidden topic because its introduction would revive the old quarrel and turn the peaceful tea table into a scene of hot and interminable contention. There are still old ladies, male and female, about the country who will tell you with check this out, who will tell you with grim gravity that if you trace up Masonry through all its orders till you come to the grand tip-top head Mason of the world, you will discover that the dread individual and the chief of the Society of Jesuits are one and the same person. There's the quote. And then he says, I have been tempted to use the word ridiculous in connection with this affair. And looking back upon it, at the distance of a quarter of a century, ridiculous seems a proper word to apply to it. So, believe it or not, this quote that appears on anti-Jesuit websites has James Parton acting like he's exposing the Jesuits and the Masons, when in fact in his book he not only was not doing that, not only was it taken out of context, but even worse than that, he was saying the exact opposite. He was mocking people who believe that, and he said people that say that are ridiculous. Okay, so that's a fact. This quote is destroyed. And it's an embarrassment. This has been up, I can't even tell you how long it's been up. For years and years and years, people let this ridiculous James Parton quote sit there as if it proves anything. Yeah, it proves that you're dumb. That's what. Or you're lazy. And you refuse to check it. Or it proves you're a liar. Maybe you're a liar. Maybe you're a shill. I don't know. But either way, you're putting this on here and discrediting yourself, and anyone who repeats it is discrediting themselves. And it's also having the opposite effect that you intend. What's the intended effect? Well, you think you're going to quote all these quotes to people and go, man, look at how bad the Jesuits are. But instead they go, man, look at all these people sharing these bunk quotes that aren't even true. Must mean that the Jesuits aren't that bad after all. And now you just went against what you were trying to do in the first place. It's ridiculous. And so that has to be the worst example I've seen so far. There might be other ones. And I'm sure we could go through other examples that we could find of supposed anti-Jesuit quotes. You go look at the full context or what it's really talking about, do some research around it. It might not even be saying what they say it's saying. And that's not to say there isn't plenty of good information. Historically, there's been plenty of good writings against the Jesuits. Books have been written that are great books, great resources. You know? I found out about another book written by the Puritan Richard Baxter called Jesuit Jugglers. You know, this has been written about many times throughout history. And in past teachings that I've done, I was quoting J.A. Wiley, and then when he references multiple different Jesuit priests, I went through and I added a note to show you the exact name of the Jesuit and who they are. And I did that for like 10 different Jesuits within the quotes in that teaching, just to show you exactly where it's coming from. It's not just pulled out of nowhere. And so this is a really messed up thing that needs to stop. And I really hope that you do stop. And so what I'm going to do is, to end this, is I am going to read this quote one more time, and I want you to think about this. I want you to think about this and never forget it about disinformation, okay? The Bill Moore quote. Disinformation is a strange and bizarre game. Those who play it are completely aware that an operation's success is dependent upon dropping information upon a target or mark in such a way that the person will accept it as truth and will repeat and even defend it to others as if it were true. Once this has been accomplished, the work of the counterintelligence specialist is complete. They can simply withdraw in the confidence that the dirty work of spreading their poisonous seeds will be done by others. Those of you who want proof of how well the process works need only look around you. Every time one of you repeats an unverified or unsubstantiated bit of information without qualifying it as such, you are contributing to that process. And every time you do it, somebody in a need-to-know position sits back and has a horse laugh at your expense. And so I hope that you consider this today, and that if you have done this, that you stop doing it. And whenever you're doing research and you are wanting to share something with someone, make sure you check that it's real, that it's true, that you can find and verify the source and not secondhand sources. Primary source documentation as much as you can so that you have credibility. Because if you're a Christian, you have something called a testimony. Well, part of your testimony is you should be trustworthy. You should be credible. People should know when you say something, you have facts to back it up. You're not just making stuff up out of thin air, out of nowhere. And after a pattern of that happening over and over again, people will say, you know what? I can trust what they say. I can trust their opinion. When they say something, I know they're not just making it up out of nowhere. They usually have the receipts. They got something to back it up. And that's what you want. All right. Well, that's it. That's the end. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Check all the links below, especially subscribe to the Telegram feed where you get all the updates and all the special stuff. And thank you for all the support, all the prayers. God bless you. Have a good day.